Hi, and welcome to the It's a Good Start podcast with your hosts Mike Lander and Kevin Givens. The aim of our show is to help scale-up entrepreneurs master the best of what other people have already figured out so that you can unlock your own potential. We started it because we've both been entrepreneurs for over 25 years and wanted to share our knowledge and our guest knowledge. We're all about actionable insights. We want to take away one or two things per episode that can help you move the ball forward in your business. We really hope you enjoy and keep coming back for more. Damian, thanks ever so much for joining us. This will be really fun and exciting for a podcast.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it.
Good. So before we kind of kick off with the broad themes, do you want to just tell the kind of listeners, what's your backstory? Where do you come from? What have you done?
I'm kind of bored of my own backstory, but I'll share it. So I'll share it with you quickly. So basically, obsessed with psychology, studied that, got into advertising, worked at big agencies, then ended up setting my own agency. That became a creative hot shop in London. We won lots of awards, sold that after 10 years to a big Japanese network. I had an old wooden boat that I'd been restoring. I went through the French canals with my wife, my 2-year-old and my 1-year-old. We got to Spain, wrote a book about the journey and kind of leaving life in the smoke. And that was sold worldwide. And then I started consulting, marketing consultancy for people like the Rolling Stones, Microsoft, J.K. Rowling, Stephen King, Lee Child, people like that. Came back to the UK after 10, 11 years in Spain and worked for a book publisher. Ended up developing a mobile game for Apple that went to #1. And then set up a business called Real Vision, which is a video channel for the finance industry. I'm not that interested in finance, if I'm perfectly honest with you, but I like the process of communication and narrative, and finance is all about telling stories about what you think is going to happen in the future. So that kind of plays into my skill sets and interests. And we're now 8 years into that business. We've got, 1 million subscribers all over the world. And it kind of, what started as a side hustle, this business, Real Vision, has now taken over my life. So wow. That's kind of me in a nutshell.
I mean, let's just kind of just interesting. We've got a couple of themes we're going to talk about, but just on that point, as you mentioned it, why start again? I mean, it's so hard. It's so hard building businesses. Why did you get off the boat and start again?
That is the question I ask myself repeatedly. Do you know what? Do you know what's the most ridiculous thing? Why am I doing this? So one day we will exit, and what will I do? I will go back to Spain and be on a boat. I mean, It's that classic, the fisherman on the beach story. It's that I am living that story out painfully. For me, I think I was too young to just stop and play golf, although shoot me if I ever started playing golf. But, to be that kind of person.
I will, by the way.
Okay, thank you. Good. I'll hold you to that. It's more about what drives me is not money. It's not running a business. What drives me is ideas, and seeing ideas come to fruition is really exciting for me. And whether it's advertising or design or a novel or a game or a business, it's all part of the same curve for me, which is having an idea and trying to find a way to bring it to life and add value to people. So, even when this goes, I think I'll probably do something else. I've already got something in the back of my mind that I'll probably do. It's not about making money. It's not about working all the hours God sends. It's just about keeping stimulated.
Interesting. So that the first kind of theme was around your background's very different to most people that I meet. Yes, entrepreneur through and through, but in a very eclectic and creative world.
Yeah, I've had a lot of careers.
Yeah, you have.
Each one is a kind of a career and very different jobs, very different roles.
Exactly.
And I'm arrogant enough to, when they come in front of me, I think, yeah, I could do that. I could. How hard can it be? How hard can it be to set up a video channel that I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm sure I'll learn the ropes. I go in with that very some would say stupid approach to it. But I think, in fact, you might see behind me on the wall, there's a picture of a punk. And this was when we very first set up Real Vision, we had a meeting. The founders, 4 founders, and said, okay, we're going to do this. We're all in. Has any of us made a video before? Have we just made, because it's a video channel? And the answer was no. I mean, not even, on a bloody handy cam. Okay. Yep. Has anyone set up a web channel before? No. Has anyone actually just done an interview with someone before? No. And then one of us, and we can't remember who, said, you know what? We know fuck about fuck. and that kind of encapsulated it. And that poster says, we know fuck about fuck. And rather than see that as a problem, I think we said, let's embrace that on the basis that we're going to go into this questioning all the norms. We're not going to be anchored to any kind of approach. We're going to be very fresh and different in the way we do it, because we're doing it from the perspective of what makes sense, what feels right, not what does the industry do. And I think that's one of the things I think for me that is very important in life, that we remember to step outside of industry norms. I saw an example recently of a toaster that's been designed by a team at Dyson. And what do we do when we make toast? We set all of us, the world over, we put the bread in, we turn the toaster on, and then after a while we go back through it and we pop it up to see if it's brown enough, if it's the right color for us. And then we go back, and then we keep popping back and forth. And so this toaster that I saw was glass. The sides were glass. So you can see.
Exactly.
You don't need to pop it up or down. And I thought, people have been designing toasters for about 70, 80 years. And they've been twiddling around making, do we make the top curved? Do we make the buttons black or blue? And they haven't stepped back and thought, how do people actually make toast? What do they actually do? And I think that comes from approaching a problem from a fresh perspective, unanchored, unhindered by history or norms. And that's, I guess, what I love. And that's why we know fuck about fuck has become our our anthem, embracing our ignorance.
That's brilliant, though. I mean, to me, it sounds like that's what drives you, because I think personally, the entrepreneurial journey of, certainly speaking from an agency perspective, building an agency and then doing it again, there's not a lot of people that would want to do that. But if you can do it in a way where it's actually, because in that case, you might as well have just carried on rather than going back to, you know how hard it was when you got started. Why go back there again? But I think if you can reinvent yourself, learn new things, and basically, rather than, it kind of sounds adverse in some ways, but rather than using your experience, try new things that you don't know. That's much more exciting, surely, because it's like you're figuring stuff out. Right. You're a lifelong learner that way.
Well, and I keep thinking to myself, I'm going to be better next time. I'll be better at whatever I do next.
Exactly. Yeah. Why not?
One of my heroes is, I think it was called Dick Fosbury. The Fosbury flop?
Yes.
So, high jumpers.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, everybody high jumped. They kind of ran up to it and they looked forward and jumped over it, like most of us do at school. And this guy decides to spin round in the air backwards and go over it. And you think, just to even think of that is really kind of radical and out there. And then to try it and perfect it, it's so off-piste that I've always looked at that as one of my kind of touchstones for how to approach problems or businesses or life or strategies. Is there is nearly always a very different way of looking at it.
Exactly.
If you just spend some time trying to think about it. Which
is the De Bono approach. De Bono became famous for exactly that, was thinking about things from different perspectives. Well, I invented the hats. His 6 hats were because you have to break assumptions. You have to break norms.
Right. Exactly.
By the way, I've got the toaster. I have a glass-fronted toaster.
Oh, see? You're always at the cutting edge then. Always ahead of the curve.
For exactly that reason. I can see my toast. I can see the colour. Leo likes it slightly less brown than me.
Yes,
so
exactly.
I look at it and pop the toaster.
Yeah. It's so...
So, question for you, and Kevin, chip in afterwards as well around this. You said you got to 1 million subscribers
Yeah.
Now, I know I've got a little email subscriber list. I've got 342 subscribers. I
Nice.
notice I count every one.
Yes.
It's taken
Yes.
me 2 years.
Yes.
How on earth do you get to 1 million? A real, genuine, interested people in what you do.
Do you know, it's incredibly hard, and it's even harder nowadays. There's a book called The Content Trap, which basically we live in an age of content, and one of the problems with businesses today is that they all understand they need to be in the content game. They've got to have their podcast, their webinar, their videos, their stories. That's how we learn about business. So every business is creating content, and the trouble is that they all kind of blend into one. It's just very hard to stand apart when what you do is content. So my view on content is that you have to add value beyond the content itself. So I'll give you an example. If I get a guest on Real Vision and they talk about the impending recession, what's coming, and they tell me their 3 top thoughts on it, that same guest will then go on another channel, and they'll go on Bloomberg, and they'll go on other videos, and they'll do all their stuff, but what happens is the expertise and the value resides with the guest.
Yes.
All we are doing as Real Vision in that context, if we did that, is we're just giving them a loudspeaker, megaphone, a platform for delivering their story. The value stays with them. If, however, we bring a guest on and we say to our audience, right, let me tell you why we're bringing this guest on. Let me tell you why we think this is important and why we're going to ask these questions. Then you have the guest. And then afterwards we say, okay, what are the takeaways we've got from that interview? What are the things that we think are really important to apply? And then what happens is the value shifts from just being about the guest to coming on to us as the delivery mechanism, which is, I like watching those guests on Real Vision, because when I watch them on Real Vision, I get to understand more of what's going on and what's happening. And my analogy to my team when I talk about it is, most people, if you ask them their favorite book, a lot of people will talk about a book they read at school, probably one that they studied. And that's because when you study a book, you're reading it. And of course, we can all read books, and that's fine. And that's one level of consumption of content. But when our teacher says to us, did you notice the way that scene echoes the scene 3 chapters back? And did you see how that foreshadowing preceded this point, or how that was an echo of that? And you suddenly look at that whole book in another light. You get so much more out of it. Poetry is a great example. You get so much more out of it when you talk through it. And so I think that our value, our role as a content platform, is to help people. I call it squeezing the most juice out of the content we put in front of them. It's not just the content itself. It's, okay, what do we take out of that, and how can it be helpful?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Kevin, what are your thoughts on that? I've got a view, but give your thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, I think it makes a lot of sense, certainly in terms of you own the platform, and there's a lot of people that are very reliant on third parties, for example. And equally, I think it's a strong point around kind of just making sure you squeeze it for everything you can, because I know there's a lot of people that look at content as a way of, let's just churn out as much content as possible and then move on to the next thing. And so what?
Yeah.
And
no, exactly.
actually,
it's a bit like when we watch the football. We watch the game, but we also like hearing the analysis.
Yeah.
Right.
You don't need the analysis, the game on its own. But and I look at the game being like an interview, but it's the bit after the analysis that often
the build up and exactly.
Yeah. I mean, interestingly, I think this is a really good point, Damian. And someone's not raised this before, but I think it's spot on, which is, if this podcast was just about, here's Damian, he's got a great story, and we shut up for half an
Correct.
hour and you
Yeah.
just talked,
Yeah.
sure, it's a distribution platform for you.
Yeah.
And some listeners might go, that's interesting. But they wouldn't keep coming back to our show because one person that likes you may not like Leon that's turning up next.
Yes, exactly.
Whereas if we can add insight and our experience, and one of our beliefs about the podcast we're doing is this is about a story, your learnings, but it's also about our insights. What have we learned?
Exactly right.
What you say triggers something in me.
Yes.
And that makes me think, so for example, on that point, there's 2 million podcasts currently, 2 million, 3 million, somewhere around there.
Yeah.
95% don't get past episode 25. Why?
Wow.
Because they're garage bands.
Yeah.
They're people sat in a room, in a shed, with a laptop, well-intentioned, and then they realize, oh my God, this is hard. I've got to find a guest, I've got to record it, I've got to edit it, I've then got to distribute it, and they distribute it, and it's tumbleweed, and they get 100 downloads. And after 150, they go, you know what? I've got better things to do with my life.
Yes.
So I think where podcasts are going is exactly this, which is you need to be able to have guests on that are interesting and eclectic, bring a different perspective, and then add value to your guest content. Because we see many guests, we should be aggregating that into insights and thoughts across guests.
Yes.
And that will hopefully engage listeners more about, I wonder what happened next.
Yes.
Where will this bigger story go?
Yes. I think that's super important. I think the other thing that's vastly underestimated is the power of personality, which is, it's a bit like when you're on an airplane and the hostess, the air hostess or the air host says, ladies and gentlemen, if you'd just like to put in your seatbelts, please listen to the instructions. And they talk in this kind of sing-songy voice, and they all adopt this same voice. And you kind of think, are they taught that? When they're on the Ryanair in-flight training school, are they taught to speak in a sing-songy voice? Because every bloody airline on the planet, they all speak in the same way. And it's not. It's just that they think that that's how you're supposed to speak when you are in that position. And there are numerous examples of we adopt a way of communicating and behaving. Sometimes it's as obvious as wearing a suit. Sometimes it's the way you speak. Sometimes it's the way you approach asking questions. But typically what happens is we think there's a way that you're supposed to do it if you're professional. And I think that vastly underestimates and gets in the way of what we most want, which is a bit of personality, emotion, real feeling, real passion. One of my pet hates is and it's best exemplified actually when you say to your kids, how was your day at school? And they say, it's all right.
Yeah.
And so many questions you say to them,
you've just lived my life.
And they say, it's all right. So you have to change the question with your kids anyway and say, what was the worst thing that happened today?
Correct.
And what was the best thing that happened? And when you push them to the extreme and you give them permission to talk like that, then you've broken out of the paradigm of this is how we're all supposed to behave and talk, and this is how we're supposed to ask questions, and this is how we're supposed to answer them. You're very good at that, mate. You and Kevin are very good at being more human and more personable and chatty. And I think that's one of the secrets to your success anyway.
Thank you. And actually, and that's really kind, Damian. Thank you, because a few people have said, I've said to people, why do you, why me? I'm doing a podcast series for a big media platform, and I was invited to be their host. And I was like, oh, why me? And they said, because you're personable.
Yeah.
Because it isn't scripted.
Yes.
It's not me in a suit. It's not me being the 25-year consultant. It's just having a discussion. Yeah. I like to go places where people don't expect to go. And it takes me, I did an improv. I was on a podcast as a guest 2 weeks ago. The guy's an improv comedian. I was on his show as a guest. And we were talking about business. And he said, there's this thing in improv called, it's two sides of the same coin, basically. It's an improv technique. And it's something like, usually we're here, and then unusually, you say something different. And I said to him, great, I've never done improv. Let's do it. Live on the podcast.
Nice.
And he went, are you sure? I went, yeah, why not?
Yeah.
And we
Brilliant.
did a 3-minute improv.
Brilliant.
And it was brilliant.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I really loved doing it because it was just different and fun.
But this goes back to, you talked about De Bono earlier, that we all know, we all say people buy people. We all know that. It's like one of the truisms of business is people buy people. And whether it's Steve Jobs or Elon Musk or the shopkeeper, it doesn't matter. We feel and want to have a human connection.
Yeah.
And yet business is structured to strip away the personality
exactly
of people at almost every stage, right from your application letter for a job all the way through to speeches and presentations. We strip away personality. If you go on a media training course, they'll say to you, try to lock your hands together and keep them to your side, and don't want to be waving your hands around. And I always think exactly what you want to be doing.
Exactly.
I say to my guys, what I'd love is I want you to be kind of half Italian, half American. And I know that's very stereotypical, but I want the confidence and the swagger and the self-belief of a cliched American. And I want the passion and the enthusiasm and the drama of an Italian. If you can get me those two things, then I think we're into a very interesting place when it comes to content and stories.
So that technique's called Fortunately, Unfortunately as an improv technique. So look it up, try it out, give it a go. It's great fun.
I will look at that. That's good.
Kevin, talk about, because this is the same thing. You've sold huge amounts of work. When I met Kevin, Kevin's very unassuming, very quiet, very calm, softly spoken. And then you get these amazing insights on a personal level, as in your personality. And people buy from you. So Kevin, just talk about, whether you know you're doing it or not, how do you sell work when you're selling agency services?
I have no idea. I just do it.
But what is it? Just try and think about what happens.
No, I think it's more about being good at my craft. So understanding what I'm doing in terms of consulting, and it's a consulting sell. So it's showing people the value of the opportunity, getting them excited about it. And to be honest, it's similar to, I guess, what Damian was saying in some ways, of trying to be different to other people, not purposely, but in a way where I think I did this in an age where certainly agency wise, there were a lot of salesmen that could come across as car salesmen. And I think it's evolved in terms of the approach. It's certainly now kind of much more consultative and helpful. And I think just by having that sort of approach, it's resonated, it's earned credibility and trust. And because it's kind of not just making promises, but delivering on that works in terms of referrals and recommendations. Again, that goes a long way when it comes to winning the next client, because it's not just like, oh, let's see who we can find and invite a short list of 10. It's this person's been recommended because we've worked with them before or something like that. So I think it's earned over time in terms of your reputation of delivering and doing a good job. And I think Damian's probably proof of that in terms of longevity. I'm sure you can be a slick salesperson and milk it for a year or two, but I don't think you can do that for 10 years, for 20 years. You have to have something of substance behind it. And I think that's really key. But I think, Damian, in terms of what you're doing creativity wise, it sounds like certainly everything you're saying is stand out and be different. And I'm sure that's exactly how you would have done it back in your agency days. If you're running a creative agency and you're the same as everyone else, who cares? Whereas if it's if you're doing something that's getting attention, then surely that's going to be much more impactful.
I agree with you, Kevin. I think in my world, if you're talking about creative work, if you're not nervous as a client, if I'm not nervous, then it's not good enough. If we're not nervous, if we're not scared whether this is the right thing to do or not, then it's not the right thing. Because if we're not nervous, then it's never going to cut through. It's never going to get noticed. The more comfortable we are and the more we think this is the right thing to do, the more I think it's the wrong thing to do.
Because you play it too safe. Exactly. It's the same as everyone else.
Yeah.
And there's a balance here, isn't there, for both of you, really, about you. And we've all seen it on, YouTube or wherever, or TikTok or whatever it might be, there's a difference between sensationalism, doing it for the sake of it to shock, and being genuine, being authentic, but coming across with something different, a new idea, something insightful, something challenging. I think that's a really hard balance to get right.
It is, because sometimes your brand is there to shock. Sometimes some brands build them, whether it's Benetton or Damian Hirst, or there's several examples going back, who that is their brand. Their brand is there to shock and disrupt. Mm-hmm. So I think there's definitely a continuum. I think the hard thing that people don't get shocked easily.
No, they don't.
It's much easier to shock a finance director and a board and the team around you than it is to shock the public.
Yeah.
Even then, the public adapt incredibly quickly. So I always look at car design. You look at the latest BMWs with these monster radiators. They've got these massive radiators, and when they were first, everyone was saying, "These are awful. Oh my god, we hate them. We hate them." Already, people are saying, "Oh, I really like that. I really like that look." It's the shock of the new, and you also have to factor that in. That just because people are shocked when they first see it, doesn't mean they won't grow to like it and grow to love it.
Yeah. And so I'm reading a brilliant book at the moment called Talk Like TED. And this guy has analyzed 150 TED Talks and tried to work out what the 9 themes are that make a TED Talk brilliant. Why are they brilliant? And it's a great book because it's got proper insights. It interviews the people that did the talks to TED themselves about what they look for. And a number of things come out. It's really worth a read. It's definitely worth a read.
Nice.
I'm actually taking notes on it, which is unusual in their book, but actually it's really interesting. A few things that are in my head. So interesting, like books that we read, you say to someone, "Oh, what's that book like?" And they go, "Yeah, it was good. It was interesting. Fascinating." And you're like, "What did you learn?" And they go, "I can't remember." And that's most books that we read. Whereas this one, a few things stick out. So one of them is a 19-minute rule. TED tell you it's either 18 or 19 minutes. You 18. Cannot speak for more than 18 or 19 minutes.
Yeah.
Why? Because they worked out the psychology of the brain, typically. Our attention span, apparently, if you go beyond 18 or 19 minutes, the energy required to sustain attention is too great, and we check out. So I think when I'm doing my presentations and I'm training people or I'm running a workshop, now I'm thinking, I need breaks every 18, 19 minutes. And they say, break it up, do something different, do an interactive session, do some kind of like puzzle, do a challenge, go for a walk. So that was interesting. And then the other thing,
when we make a video, Mike, if we cut between shots, one shot to another shot, just that, and or we drop in a chart, just changing the dynamic of what you're looking at,
exactly,
will sustain engagement for longer.
That's precisely what they said. That's really interesting. That's exactly what they said. Is drop something in, drop a chart in, drop a video in, drop something different in, and it changes the mind to focus on something different.
You reset.
That's exactly it. You reset. And the other thing they said to do is tell stories. It's so obvious. I mean, it's obvious. But they said, actually, what it's about is when you tell a personal story, there were 3 story types. There's one about you, one about someone else, and one about a product or a business. If you can tell those types of stories, people engage in a story. You can't deny the story because it's assuming it's true. You can't deny the story. And it illustrates a point. So if you can tell stories that illustrate a point based upon third-party data that's true and relevant, people will remember.
Yes.
And when you're doing your videos for your business, is that something that you think about?
You know what? So and the reason I'm still at Real Vision, I guess, is because I thought finance was very objective and rational and all about numbers,
Right.
Is this business worth investing in, or is it doing well? It's pretty cold and heartless and rational, as they say. And what I've realized is it's not that at all. Finance, what you do in finance, if you're going to invest money, let's say I gave you both $100,000 and I said, right, go and invest it, guys. What you're going to do is you're going to think about where you're going to put that money.
Yeah.
What you will do is you will look at a business, let's say Apple, and you're going to look at it and think, okay, what's going to happen to this business over the next 2 years? Because that's going to determine whether my money goes up or down.
Yeah.
Let's say Kevin says, I'm going to put my money into Twitter. Oh, and they've just been taken over by Musk. Okay, is it going to go up or down? Now, what you are doing in making your investment decision is you are trying to predict the future.
Yeah.
And nobody knows.
No.
So what happens is you will look for research, and all of the research and all of the guidance you get is storytelling. It is somebody making up a story about what's going to happen over the next year or 2 years. Now, admittedly, there are revenue numbers on the past, and there are consumer bases and appeal. But even then, you will find radically, wildly different narratives about whether the price of gold is going to go up or down, whether we're going into a recession or not, how long it's going to last. So the whole business is about storytelling. And I think, wow, if even finance is about storytelling, then everything is about storytelling.
Kevin, what are your thoughts on that? And that's really interesting.
Well, I think it is, because you have to resonate with that audience. And I think it, and it's how it, I remember there's an article that I'm sure I could dig it out, but it's how every Disney movie is the same in terms of when you look at the story arc, and like they've nailed what works for them, and they'll make every story look different, but it's got the same premise in terms of how they connect with the audience.
It's the same in finance. There is, if you take Elon Musk and Tesla, he's the hero, growing his business. The enemy is the
big car industry.
Exactly. They're taking them on.
Yeah.
You have the struggles, the battles, it's a narrative. There are constant narratives.
Who's the guide in that story, Damian? Who's the guide, do you think, in Tesla's story? Because there's normally a guide. There's a Yoda.
There is a Yoda. Weirdly, in that one, the Yoda is probably the hero himself. It's kind of, I think I think Musk is also the Yoda, because he's the one who is, whether you believe it or not or like it or not, he's the one who's predicting where the world is going to go and then actually shaping it as well.
Yeah.
It's quite an unusual character, actually. There aren't many people in history who say, I think we should be living on the moon, and do you know what? I'm going to build a rocket and get us up there. There aren't many people who think of it and then do it, as it were.
Kevin?
No, that's right. I was just going to say, I think it's similar in life. And there's a book that I'm reading at the moment called Two Mountains, and it's about mountain number one is you learn your craft, you're good at something, and you're obsessed over, let's say, a financial target or something that's a bit more of a egocentric thing to aim towards as a metric. You then enter the valley, which is something goes wrong, you have a realization, it's a personal tragedy, or there's quite a lot of things that will happen to people during that that period, and this could be early on in your life or potentially later. And then from that point you see the first mountain differently, and then there's a second mountain of actually, what can I do that has more purpose? And I think that's a similar sort of thing of what we're talking about with the story arc, of how do you then grow, and how do you take that to do something that is more meaningful for you. It's not just, how do I make the most amount of money? How do I get the most amount of social media likes? Whatever it is that floats your boat earlier on will probably change. And there'll probably be a big event that changes that. But I think it's interesting that story arc, I guess, when you look at it from a movie perspective, perhaps is actually true in life in a lot of cases as well.
Absolutely agree. Yeah.
So we're heading towards the end.
Right.
About 3 or 4 minutes. So we always like to leave kind of listeners with what the kind of 3 things. So we haven't prepared this, Damian, clearly. But on the journey of the last, I don't know, probably 25 years of building things that you've done, working for companies, building businesses, building brands, being creative.
Yeah.
Most of our listeners tend to be entrepreneurs, typically not startups. They're like, normally a million turnover plus. If they were scaling their businesses, what are the kind of 3 things that you think about when you're thinking of scaling a business that you've kind of learned?
I would say, in no particular order of the three, I think if you look at surveys of CEOs, I think IBM do the biggest survey of CEOs, the thing that they most value and most want is creativity. Now, that doesn't mean being able to draw. It means creative thought. I think we are about to enter a period over the next 2 years of deep pain economically. There are going to be job cuts. There are going to be companies going under. There's going to be a lot of suffering. And it's very important in times like that, that companies, whatever size, are agile in their thinking. That doesn't mean fast. I just mean that they are able to respond and react to the changing situations that we're in and look for solutions that aren't what they've necessarily done before or what other people are doing. If you just do what everyone else is doing, you're not really going to succeed in this much tougher time. So I think the first thing is try to think differently, try to think creatively, and put an emphasis and a premium on approaching the problems that we're all going to face over the next 2 years in fresh and interesting ways.
Yeah.
The second thing I'll say is always obsess about what your customer thinks and feels. And it sounds like the most obvious thing in the world. And yet what we all do is we've got our business and we make improvements and we obsess about, we can now do it 10% faster, or we've now got a new widget on our website that does what's it. Nobody cares. You've got to start with the audience and what are they thinking and feeling, not what are you doing, and a good example is Marmite, who for years told people it was tasty, meaty, whatever it tastes. And then after a while, they realized, you know what? Half the world just hate Marmite. So why don't we just embrace that and recognize it? And their advertising suddenly became love it or hate it. And, sales took off. So kind of recognize where your customer is. Don't obsess about yourself. And then the third thing I think is what I said earlier is if you're not scared, it's not good enough. If you're not nervous, it's not going to work. It'll be competent, but everybody's competent. Yeah. Everybody in your sector is competent. If you aren't doing stuff that truly you're not sure how it's going to play out, your guts are telling you it feels like a right thing to do, then you should do it. And if it does screw up, fine, it screws up. Just talk to your audience, apologize, and say, this is why we did it. I mean, what we often do in Real Vision is we say, look, we're going to try something. We don't know if it's going to work, but we're going to do it anyway to see. You might like it. If you do, great, we'll double down on it.
Yeah.
So in this era of constant communication with our audience, whether it's a client base or a consumer audience or a B2B audience, doesn't matter. You can talk to them all the time. So you don't have to just drop a shock on them and then suffer if it doesn't work.
Yeah.
You can move the chess pieces in your favor before you do it. So
it's probably similar. I was going to say it's probably similar with targets as well. If you've got, say, I don't know, next year we want to grow by 5% versus next year we want to double the size of the company and do X, Y, Z, which one's going to get more people excited? And it's in a weird way, it might be easier to double the size of the company than it is to plod along.
That's such a good and insightful point, because if you said to me, we're going to grow the company by 5%, I think, right, just do a bit more of what we're doing, a bit better maybe, and a bit more efficient. If you said we're going to double in size, I'm suddenly going to think, okay, we need to change a few things. Right. And I think that instantly you've set people in a different direction, and you probably won't double in size, but you might get close. Very close.
Exactly. Damian, that's been fantastic. Thank you ever so much.
Absolute pleasure.
Really nice enjoyed it.
Guys.
Thanks a lot, Damian.
And Damian, where can people find more about you?
DamianHorner.com.
Perfect. Everyone, DamianHorner.com. Damian, amazing. Thank you.
Nice to chat, guys. Take care.
Bye. Thanks for listening to our podcast. We hope you learned something new and useful about entrepreneurship. We'd love it if you could rate or review us on the app you use to listen to this on. Thanks.